Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's Our Parsha Pearls. And this week, we're going to take a look at the story of the golden calf. I know of this elderly old priest some years ago who told his Northwest London parishioners he was sick and tired of people coming in and confessing infidelity all the time. So in a passionate sermon, he told them, if one more person is going to come in and confess infidelity, then I'm going to quit my job. So they decided altogether that, you know what, they're no longer going to refer to it as such. They're going to only refer to it as having fallen. You committed infidelity, you'd come into the priest, forgive me, Father, for I have fallen. Problem is, after a while, the priest retired and nobody told the new guy about this code word. So after his first week, he goes to see the head of Barnet Council. Sir, I think we need to do something about the pavements in Northwest London. Everybody seems to keep falling. The councillor bursts out laughing, realizing no one had told him about the new code word. To which the priest looks at him and says, I don't know what it is you find so funny, sir. Your wife came to tell me that she alone fell 3 times just last week. The relationship between God and the Jewish nation is one which is typically described as a marriage. God being the groom, the Jews being the bride. And when reflecting on the history of the Jewish nation, there are specific identifiable moments when we, the bride, truly fell through blatant acts of unfaithfulness. And of course, the first and perhaps most famous is that which we read in this Torah portion of this week, the worshiping of the golden calf. Moshe departs from them for a period of 40 days. They miscalculate, they assume he's no longer coming back. They employ magic and mystical means to create this calf of gold that they now serve as a new focal point of worship. A mere 24 hours later, Moshe comes back. He's flabbergasted as to this brazen act of infidelity, flagrant lack of faith. He immediately responds by smashing the tablets containing the 10 commandments, and then, of course, later has to employ all of his negotiating skill and tactic to ensure God doesn't wipe out the nation. And whenever I reflect on the story, there's always one thing in particular that disturbs me. The Israelites miscalculated the 40 days when they anticipated Moshe's return. Fine, but what's with the knee-jerk reaction? Why not err on the side of caution, write it out another day or two or whatever it is? They're off by just several hours. Allow for a margin of error before even considering doing something that could have catastrophic consequences, as indeed it did. But the hard fact is that is precisely the frailty of man. We tend to act sometimes impulsively, sometimes instinctively, but hardly, if ever, taking into consideration the broader implications, the longer term effects. What we don't often realize is that no act is ever committed in isolation. There is an invariable ripple effect. Everything has consequences, whether good or bad, which reverberate, sometimes almost immediately after, other times maybe years on. It's what is typically known as the chaos theory or the butterfly syndrome. When the butterfly flaps its minuscule wings, creating an ever so tender and faint wind in London, it can gather momentum and build speed to eventually touch the shores of Mexico. It could be a trivial act, something we really don't give much consideration to, a simple word, a small gesture, but it resonates and can have compelling results. When the Jews served that golden calf, they set into motion an irrevocable sequence of events, not just going forward, but indeed even retroactive. You see, when the Jews left Egypt, it was at God's insistence that they take much gold and silver with them. And it was his intent that this would be used for the making of a holy abode, a sanctuary in the desert. The significance would be that if something so positive, so holy, so spiritual could emerge from the remnants of Egypt, that at least the endurance of the servitude over so many years would not have been entirely in vain. It doesn't justify the suffering, nor does it validate even in the slightest the loss of however many lives, but still at least a touch of comfort and awareness of the fact that an element of goodness has resulted. But when utilizing that gold instead to such destructive ends in the making of a golden calf, it wasn't just about the moment, but effectively rendering in retrospect the whole Egyptian exile futile, with no redeeming factor whatsoever. And that negative remnant then stands and lingers so that nearly 1,000 years later, on the very same day, the walls of Jerusalem were besieged, paving the way for the eventual destruction of our temple, resulting in our exiled state and countless persecutions since. And every Yom Kippur from then till present day, we still make reference to that event and declare, forgive us, Father in heaven, for we have sinned. We have fallen. But to be sure, it works like that in the negative, certainly works like that exceptionally more so in the positive as well. I'll give you an example. Years ago, there was this girl, Esty, visiting from Melbourne, Australia, who came to stay with us for a Shabbat. The following week, she called to ask if she could stay again. We were inclined to make our excuses, but in the end, we thought, you know what? Why not? So we told her, by all means, yes, you can come along and you can stay with us. A little while later, she calls up and she says she's meeting up with her friend Barry from Antwerp. Would it be possible if he can stay with us over Shabbat as well? Now we're no longer in a position to say no, so we complied. Thursday night, 10 p.m., Esty sends a text from a restaurant. We're here with Barry's friend Jeremy from Brighton. I understand if you say no, but it would be great if he could join us for Shabbat as well. So an anticipated quiet Friday night was going to turn into a small singles party. I couldn't help but joke to Esty on the Friday afternoon that if Jeremy has a friend, I'm out of here. Friday night, returning home from Shul, there's a knock on the door. His name was Lawrence, a Jewish friend of Jeremy's, just coming in to say hello. I don't have to tell you how we fell about laughing after Lawrence accepted my invitation for dinner, and I bolted my door thereafter. But here's the real catch. How does Lawrence know to come to my home? Because Jeremy recognized his house as he was coming down a few blocks, pulling up to my own before Shabbat. That's right. Lawrence, a nice young Jewish man living just a couple of blocks away, unbeknown to me, and would have remained so were it not for the fact that we said yes to Esty from Australia coming for Shabbat in the first instance. Reaching even just one soul with a message of love sets into motion a reaction which passes that hopeful message to others and then to more, rippling out to countless souls. The actions we take create a series of consequences for the people in our lives. Those ripples are passed along through our network of friends, family, associates, coworkers, clients, even casual acquaintances. Every ripple has the power to affect their lives, perhaps subtly, perhaps dramatically. By consciously creating positive ripples, we can systematically improve the lives of others. And that in turn actually comes back on us and enhances our own life, increased happiness, improved loyalty, new opportunities, and a more satisfying sense of purpose. So if there's one lesson to be learned from that all-important episode of the Golden Calf, it's that when things happen to us, it's the reaction we choose that can create the difference between the sorrows of our past or the joys in our future. So with that in mind, here's a question for you. What do you want to be when you grow up? It's a question every child has been asked at some point in their childhood lifetimes. Usually the responses are linked with heroic fantasies. I want to be a policeman, a football player. Sometimes they're fashioned by social conditions. A child from a struggling home might dream of becoming a millionaire. Someone growing up in the bustle of city life might yearn for life in the country. But these dreams, these fantasies, they don't really end with childhood, do they? Many an adult might ask themselves, if I could change something about my life, if I could be something else, what would I be? If, of course, the answer is anything other than what you already are, then you're not entirely happy or at peace with where you are at and with what you might presently be doing. To be sure, aspiration is vital for success, but wanting to escape the reality of your current situation suggests you're not relaxed, you're not content. And the question then is that lack of contentedness because your present predicament is simply not suited to you, which is fair enough? Or is it more symptomatic of a restless heart, such that wherever your next stop will be for however long, after a while, you're going to get back on the gravy train once more? Again, enter the Golden Calf as we read about this week. It's certainly one of the more enigmatic stories in Jewish history. They experienced, the Jews, so many manifestations of divine benevolence. They escaped their Egyptian taskmasters. They crossed an impregnable sea. They had all the food and sustenance required. Water is in full supply, even in their desert world. In short, miracles abounded. God was everywhere. But they were not happy. They were not content. I have God. I experience God on so many levels, but it's not enough. Now I want to see God on my terms, by my own definition, so they make a golden calf. You know how they say you can never have too much of a good thing? Well, it seems the Jews in the desert certainly did. They had an abundance of good things, but alas, the biggest problem in life, in society, in relationships, at work, in fact, in virtually every dimension of our existence, it is that familiarity breeds contempt. Truth be told, there is no such a thing as too much of a good thing other than the insatiable character it carves out in the unappreciative. I believe that we all have golden calves, not objects, but images. The image of being something that we are not, the image of being more successful, the image of appearing more beautiful, the image of being happier than we might already be. And thus, even as you're here, you're ready to looking to see what's out there. such that you never get to thoroughly enjoy the here. You never learn to live in the moment and to appreciate what you have now. Our desires always disappoint us because even when we meet with something that gives us satisfaction, it never thoroughly answers our expectation. It's what our rabbis say when they tell us who is wealthy: one who is satisfied with their lot. One of the great undiscovered joys of life comes from recognizing that your given set of circumstances is where you're meant to be. There's a treasure to be unearthed in doing everything you can and to the best of your ability where you are now. Sometimes the problem of having too much of a good thing is system overload. You know how you lose something and then you go searching for it? And what is it that people say? It's always in the last place you look. Why do they say that? Of course, it's in the last place you will have looked. It's not as if you'll have found it and then keep on looking. But the reason why it takes longer than expected to normally find where you put those car keys or where you left your wallet is because in that initial state of panic, when you realize something of importance is missing, all the many places you think it might be come rushing to the fore, and your brain is one big mumble jumble of ideas. And so you're confused. It's only when you take time out, when you step back, you breathe, the mind then relaxes, everything falls into sequence. Your brain then systematically processes and focuses on each place you visited before you realized it missing. Authors, scriptwriters, lecturers, yes, even rabbis, when having to deliver talks, will tell you that sometimes so many ideas come crashing on the shores of one's creativity that the brain just jams to a halt. And you need to totally distract yourself with something altogether disconnected so that the structure of ideas can then be better filtered through, and you'll have that aha moment. The Jews in the desert were being plied with miracle upon miracle. It was system overload, such that they couldn't pause long enough to focus on the individual blessings in their lives. So they make a golden calf, and God's response is that he's withdrawing himself from them. Maybe it wasn't so much a punishment as a means for time out. In the vacuum, they could better appreciate what once filled the void. And the message to you and me is, it is often precisely when so many things are going so well at once that we lose perspective. And as soon as one or more of those things don't go to plan, we throw in the towel, we get ready to move on to something else. That, as the Jews in the desert came to discover, is a recipe for disaster. Take time out. Focus on each dimension of your life. Learn to appreciate every moment in its own right and within its own context. We navigate the highs and the lows on the graph of life, but our objective is to stay focused throughout. Appreciate the miracles of every day. Learn to enjoy every minute. Live in the present. Launch yourself on every wave. Find your eternity in every given experience, and go on to discover all the beautiful blessings within.